The first lie they ever told me was that I was worthless. The second, and far more dangerous lie, was that I had started to believe them. Last Tuesday, my own sister Isolde, branch president of the most powerful financial institution in Providence, looked me in the eye and told me to get out. "We have standards, Ilara," she'd announced to the hushed, marble-floored lobby, her voice dripping with condescending pity. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my name was the only thing holding up the floor beneath her designer heels. And I was about to pull the thread. The real withdrawal wasn't going to be about money. It was going to be about my silence, my name, my loyalty. Ever been betrayed so quietly it felt like your own fault, right up until the moment the truth sucked all the air out of the room? What happened next made her drop to her knees. The autumn chill had a particular bite this year in Providence, a damp cold that seeped in from the Narragansett Bay and clung to the Gilded Age stonework. The last of the stubborn, rust-colored leaves shivered on the trees lining Benefit Street as a sharp wind swept up the hill. I pulled the collar of my coat tighter, my fingers brushing against the worn leather cover of the book tucked in my pocket. It was a thin volume of poetry by a forgotten local author, a gift from my grandfather years ago. He'd told me it was for days when the world felt too loud. I pushed through the heavy, brass-handled doors of the downtown branch of the New England Merchants Bank. The air inside smelled of antiseptic lemon polish and old money, a sterile, sanitized scent that always felt like an accusation. I wasn't here for myself. Mr. Abernathy, the elderly man who lived in the apartment below mine, had mentioned his furnace was broken. I'd seen the faint blue tint to his lips and the way he held his teacup with trembling hands. $200 would get it fixed before the first real frost set in. It was reason enough. The bank's interior was a cathedral of wealth. Sunlight streamed through impossibly tall arched windows, illuminating the gleaming marble floors. Everyone inside moved with a practiced ease, their clothes whispering of casual expense. I wore a simple gray coat, mended twice at the cuff, and jeans that were clean but faded. I felt the glances, subtle but sharp, assessing whether I was lost or simply out of my league. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" The voice was a silken thread of disdain, spun just behind my ear. I didn't have to turn to know. Isolde. She wore a severe, cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my rent for the year. Her heels clicked like judgmental little periods on the polished floor as she approached, a practiced, predatory smile fixed in place. A nervous-looking junior associate trailed in her wake. "Ilara," she said, her voice a syrupy performance for the benefit of the other customers. "Still gracing us with your presence, are we?" I finally met her gaze, the same perfectly painted lips, the same smug tilt of her chin. She never had to raise her voice to command a room. Her sheer contempt did all the work. She leaned closer, her perfume cloying. "You know, we've updated our client protocols. We're not really equipped to handle walk-ins of your nature anymore." Then, louder, for the man in the cashmere scarf behind me, she added, "Especially not beggars." The word landed with the force of a physical blow, echoing in the vast, silent space. A woman near the teller window turned to stare openly. Isolde's smile widened, as if she'd just performed a great act of charity by putting me in my place. "You understand, don't you?" she purred. I gave a slow, deliberate nod, not of agreement, but of acknowledgement. I had learned long ago that some battles are won not with a shout, but with the deafening roar of a well-timed silence. My fingers found the worn leather of the book in my pocket, its familiar texture a small, solid anchor in the churning sea of her scorn. Then, I stepped out of the line. My worn boots made no sound. I walked directly past Isolde, my eyes fixed on the doors, and didn't offer her a single word. Outside, the cold air felt like a mercy, kissing my cheeks and clearing my head. My reflection in the bank's polished glass was that of a woman with her head held high, her gaze steady. The tears would not come. Not for this. Not anymore. That night, my small apartment on the city's west side was a sanctuary. It smelled of chamomile tea and old paper, my kind of peace. I placed the book of poetry on the small table by the window, its cover facing up. I let my hand rest on it for a moment. A silent promise. Then I retrieved the laptop from its hiding place beneath a stack of quilts. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow in the dim room. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that would have shocked anyone who knew me. The passphrase was a line from one of the poems in the book. The winter raven remembers the thaw. For a heartbeat, the screen remained black. Then, the portal opened. A sleek, minimalist interface, a digital ghost few in the world knew existed, and even fewer could access. My name was nowhere on it. My alias was Nyx, the goddess of the night, a name I'd chosen for its quiet, absolute power. A single encrypted message was waiting. It was from my partner, Kale. Are you finally ready? I stared at the blinking cursor, my heart a slow, steady drum. Then I typed my reply. It's time. He didn't ask for an explanation. We had designed the system that way. No emotion, no hesitation, only purpose. When I had first walked away from my family, it wasn't an act of surrender. It was strategy. They had never seen me. You? My father had once sneered, tossing aside my application for a coding boot camp. You'll be lucky if they let you clean the keyboards. Isolde was always worse. Maybe aim a little lower, Elara, she'd advised with a tinkling laugh when I spoke of building my own systems. The world doesn't owe you a corner office. So I vanished. Not because I was weak, but because I needed the silence to build something their noise could never penetrate. Kael and I registered our holding company through a labyrinth of international firewalls and legal constructs. We called it Ethelred Holdings. I designed the architecture, the trust systems, the impenetrable security. He secured the initial capital. Now, years later, I held the controlling interest, hidden behind layers of fiduciary anonymity so deep that not even my own accountant could trace it back to the quiet woman in the gray coat. And Isolde, in her relentless pursuit of prestige, had spent the last 2 years courting Ethelred Holdings as a major client for her bank. They had finally succeeded last quarter, hosting a significant portion of our liquid assets. I had reviewed the contract myself, had watched her flourishing signature appear on the digital documents, utterly oblivious to the fact that she was signing a deal with the sister she so openly despised. Now, I opened the main command panel. I typed, "Display active accounts under Ethelred Holdings." The screen populated instantly. The numbers rolled across the interface, quiet, precise, and unforgiving. $4.1 billion in liquid assets. It wasn't just money. It was leverage. It was time I could buy back. It was dignity I could reclaim. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a ghost of a tremor running through them. For a fleeting second, I heard their voices, their laughter, the old familiar question. What if they're right? What if I am still that girl? Then I remembered Isolde's voice, sharp and clear in the echoing bank. We don't serve beggars here. I pressed enter. Nothing exploded, no alarms blared. But deep inside me, a tightly wound spring that had been coiled for 2 decades finally, silently, snapped. I closed the laptop, the weight of it feeling solid and real in my hands. I picked up my phone, scrolled past the muted group chats and the names of people who only remembered me when they needed something, and tapped a single contact, my legal counsel. Schedule an in-person appointment tomorrow at the main branch of New England Merchants Bank, I typed. The client is Ethelred Holdings. I looked over at the book of poetry on the table. It was no longer just a comfort. It was a testament to everything they thought I wasn't, and everything I was about to become. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones as my car pulled up to the bank. I stepped out, adjusting the lapels of a charcoal gray jacket that was perfectly tailored, understated, and lethally expensive. I stood for a moment at the base of the towering glass doors, not with hesitation, but with a sense of quiet ceremony. My hands were perfectly still. A man in a crisp suit held the door. "Ma'am?" He nodded respectfully. I offered a polite, small smile and walked inside. The same marble floors, the same scent of lemon and power, but today it all seemed smaller, less imposing. "Good morning," I said to the young woman at the reception desk. "I have an appointment. It's for Ethelred Holdings." I placed a sleek black portfolio on the polished wood. Before she could respond, her monitor blinked with a bright red high-priority notification. A flicker of confused panic crossed her face. Just then I saw her. Isolde. She was holding court near the espresso machine, laughing with a regional manager. The moment her eyes landed on me, the laughter died. She crossed the lobby like a gathering storm cloud in her impossibly high heels. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. "I told you yesterday. This is not a shelter. Whatever pathetic little stunt you're planning, just don't." I ignored her completely, my attention fixed on the receptionist. "Could you please scan the QR code inside the folio?" I asked softly. The young woman, flustered, opened it. Isolde snatched it from her hands. "Enough of this nonsense. Let's see what my little sister is playing at this time." She flipped through the documents, her condescending smirk slowly, beautifully dissolving. It was a marvelous thing to watch. Her eyes froze on the first page. She flipped to the next, her knuckles white. She looked up at me, her mouth slightly agape. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. The branch manager, a tall man with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone trained for crises, approached. He gently took the folio from Isolde's paralyzed grip. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, nodding to me. "Let me just—" He glanced at his own screen, typed a few commands, and then stopped. He froze. He turned to Isolde, his voice now a strained, careful whisper. "Isolde, this is a Level 1 VIP authorization. It's a primary withdrawal request flagged as critical. Ethelred Holdings. Your name is listed here as the partner entity liaison. Did you know about this?" The silence that fell was absolute. It was a heavy, weighted silence, the kind that presses down on your chest. I could hear the faint whir of the security cameras. Isolde took a half step back, the color draining from her face. That's not possible. It's a fake. Some kind of elaborate forgery." "It's real, Isolde," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the lobby. "You've been working for me, indirectly, of course, for 2 years, all while you were laughing at me." The manager's assistant hurried over and whispered something to him. He nodded once, his eyes wide as he read from his screen. "Withdrawal authorized. Amount requested, $4.1 billion. Confirmed. Entity signature validated. Lockdown protocol for audit compliance is now initiated. Lobby is closed." The receptionist remotely locked the front doors with a soft click. One of the tellers dropped a pen, and it clattered loudly on the floor. Isolde's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. She was pale, rigid, a statue of hubris. Then something inside her seemed to shatter. She stumbled forward, her ankles giving way in those ridiculous heels, and she collapsed. She fell to her knees on the cold marble floor, right in front of me. "Elara," she whispered, her eyes wild with a pleading terror I had never seen before. Don't do this. You don't understand what this means. Please, I have a mortgage. I have a career. I have a reputation." I tilted my head, a gesture of mild curiosity. "You ruined your reputation," I said, my voice low and even. "All I ever did was step back and let you be who you are." Behind her, someone gasped. The manager didn't move. No one did. They just stared at this powerful woman, now a crumpled heap on the floor, begging. "You're my sister," she choked out, mascara beginning to smudge beneath her eyes. "Am I?" I asked, the question hanging in the sterile air. "You and Father and Julian made it very clear a long time ago that I was not part of this family." The only sound was the faint hum of the servers in the back. No alarms, no shouting, just the quiet, brutal spectacle of a queen dethroned in her own court. I turned to the manager. "I'd like to speak with your executive board, privately. This matter does not need to be handled on the main floor." He nodded instantly, already pressing the call button for the private elevator. "Of course, we will take you to the Founders' Lounge immediately." As I walked past Isolde, still frozen on the floor, I did not glance down. The black folio remained tucked securely under my arm, and as the polished brass doors of the elevator slid shut, the last thing I saw was the stunned, silent lobby, a tableau of a world that had just been irrevocably and quietly turned upside down. Later that week, I agreed to the family dinner. After the storm of frantic voicemails and ignored calls from my brother Julian and his wife Beatrice, the formal invitation felt like a summons to a surrender. I chose the restaurant, an old, quiet place in Federal Hill with dark wood and even darker corners. I arrived first, taking the chair at the head of the table. For the first time in my life, that position didn't feel like a presumption. It felt like a fact. My brother and his wife arrived together, their smiles stretched too tight. Julian, always the pragmatist, tried to sound brotherly. "Ilara, it's been too long. You look grounded." Isolde was next. She looked diminished, smaller, her usual fire banked to a dull smolder. She took the seat farthest from me and said nothing. Finally, our mother, Genevieve. She moved with a fragile grace, her eyes carrying a sorrow that looked ancient. "My girls," she murmured, as if trying to conjure a past that had never truly existed. The pretense was unbearable. The small talk about the weather, Julian's hints about a new venture he wanted me to look at, Beatrice's vapid compliments on my jacket. Finally, I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "Did any of you ever wonder what happened to Grandfather Silas's land trust in Vermont?" The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The air grew cold. Julian blinked. Beatrice's smile vanished. It was Isolde who spoke, her voice raspy. "That was dissolved decades ago. Father took care of it." I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the table. On the cover sheet, stamped in the corner, was the word active. "Actually," I said, meeting Isolde's stunned gaze, "it wasn't. It was buried, forgotten. But I never let it die." I had found the dusty paperwork in a forgotten box after my father's funeral. Over the years, using the first money I ever made, I had quietly paid the taxes, fought off developers, and rebuilt it. The land, once considered worthless, was now sitting on one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in the Northeast. My mother whispered, "You kept it?" I nodded. "I rebuilt it, and none of you ever noticed." The waiter appeared, a silent ghost with a check holder. "Will this be on one bill tonight?" I stood, slipping the strap of my bag over my shoulder, and looked at the stunned faces of the people who had once told me I had no head for business. "No," I said. "Everyone covers their own." I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool, clear night. Legacy isn't about what you're given. It's about what you refuse to let die. A week later, I sat on a park bench under a sprawling oak tree. The early morning was quiet, the air smelling of cut grass and possibility. On my lap rested a small, frayed blue savings book, the kind they don't make anymore. The corners were soft with age. After the dinner, everything had unraveled with a quiet finality. The board had forced Isolde's resignation. Julian's business partners grew skittish. The foundations of their world, built on my erasure, had crumbled. My phone had rung, of course. My mother, I never picked up. But 2 days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a confession. She wrote of her fear after my grandfather died, of how my father and Julian had consolidated power, convincing her that sidelining me, the quiet, difficult one, was a form of protection. They called it security, she wrote, but it was control, and in my weakness, I allowed it. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking you not to become the thing that hurt you. I opened the old savings book. My grandfather had opened it for me when I was 8. Most of the pages were blank, but tucked into a small pocket in the back cover was a folded slip of paper I'd never seen. His strong, steady handwriting filled the small space. For Ilara, because she has the truest heart. Use this when they forget who you are. A quiet smile touched my lips. I had never needed their approval. I had his. That was the one fortune they could never touch. I had withdrawn everything I needed from them that day in the bank, but it was never the money. It was my name, my loyalty. At my future, I took it all back from the people who had squandered it, and I was investing it somewhere new, somewhere it could grow. Across the lawn, a low, modern building of glass and reclaimed steel gleamed in the morning sun. A new silver sign was being installed above the door. The Thorn Center for Ethical Enterprise, my nonprofit, our nonprofit. Today was the first day I would walk inside, not with fear, but with ownership. Funny how money reveals character. But silence, I had learned, earns its own kind of interest. As I stood, a small raven landed on the grass nearby. It didn't startle or beg for crumbs. It simply was, present. It watched me for a moment with its intelligent black eyes, then took flight, soaring up into the clear blue sky. I watched it go, a long, full breath escaping my lips. No fireworks, no victory parade, just peace. They had spent a lifetime trying to write my story in their ledgers. The final withdrawal was not of money, but of the pen itself. I was finally writing my own.